quite an honor, both an honor and an opportunity to accept this award, and I'll explain. It's an honor for a lot of reasons, to share with Jamie, Lincoln, and Rick, incredible presentations. After those presentations, I don't know, I think I can go back and do my work on pre-Civil War banking. Nancy. I want to talk about Nancy and her influence on this area. One of the reasons it's such an honor to accept this award. But first I have to say a few words about George. I really don't know the other members of the family, but I do know George. In fact, I knew George well before I knew Nancy. And as most of you know, George is quite a leader in our community. He's been a leader for many years. One of the most well-respected politicians, at least since I've been in Minnesota way back in the 60s. I came here to study under Walter Howard at the University of Minnesota. But I was very influenced by George in a number of areas, thinking a lot about public policy at local levels. And George was a great spokesperson, deep thinker, and very influential in the state. But having said all that, he married up. So when did I meet Nancy? Nancy, I really met Nancy at one of the first board meetings about 9 years ago for Ready for K. Nancy was the McKnight representative board meeting. Because I knew George, I didn't really know the other board members that well. And I figured, well, I'll sit next to Nancy and talk a little bit about George and some other issues as well. And I was curious about McKnight and their role with Ready for K. And it was pretty clear she felt passionately that we needed to elevate the discussion. We needed to elevate the issue about early childhood education and development. And that's why McKnight was so supportive of Ready for K, and why Nancy was the McKnight representative that was pretty influential. And Ready for K didn't disappoint. Ready for K was able, in a very short period of time, to elevate the issues. So at one point, when the Star Tribune did a poll, did a survey on top issues in the state, public policy issues, within a few years, that poll showed that early childhood development was at the very top or close to the top of the list. Ready for K, if you will, was very good at getting the grassroots support for the issue. Nevertheless, Nancy and I were both frustrated because while we were kind of educating the public, we really weren't moving the political ball very much. And one of the areas that Nancy and I discussed, where her influence showed, was, at least with me, is that we got into a debate. And it became an ongoing debate on what was the best way to move the political ball, to make a big difference. Nancy argued it needed to be universal, that we had to think about universal pre-K. Pre-K for all children. The only way you're going to get buy-in from the middle class, from the suburbanites, if you will, on this issue, is if we offered something to everybody. Nancy took the political view. I said, Nancy, I understand the political view, but economically that doesn't make sense. I said, you know, I live out, I lived out in New Hope. I said, you don't have to do this with the parents out in New Hope. Those kids are already doing fine. Subsidizing them is going to be very expensive, and you're not going to get much of a return on it. We really need to focus in on the most at-risk kids. Those are the kids that are falling behind. Those are the kids that aren't making it into society. Those are the kids that, if you invest and invest well, the return's extraordinary for all of us. So my argument, it was a return for all of us. Although, as Nancy said, people don't understand. But they do understand universal. So Nancy and I debated this, and on almost every meeting when we were together, we continued to debate. And I think we kind of enjoyed the give and take. And eventually, we kind of came together. Now, how did we do that? Because, well, we said, look, she kind of agreed that with limited dollars, you start with the most average kids. I kind of agreed that all kids need this, and you could think of, it's not easy to draw a line exactly where we should say this is an at-risk kid and this is not. And so what came out of that is, well, we would think of like a tiered pricing. So if you started funding with the most at-risk kids, they get the full funding, and then it's as you move up the income ladder, we would tier the pricing. And we kind of came together on that. And really that got me thinking way back then about this idea of one way to do this. It was very consistent with, I'll talk about this because this is what I talked about with Nancy, very consistent with the work that Rob Greenwald and I was doing to come up with a scholarship. As a scholarship idea, we could empower and engage the parents right away. We could do tiered pricing. And so it was out of those discussions that second essay that was mentioned, we started to promote the scholarship. We call it Scholarship Plus. We call it Scholarship Plus because of the incredible work Megan and her colleagues have done, scientists have done to show us that having scholarships for 3- and 4-year-olds for a lot of these kids, that's too late. Nancy got that right away. You got to start at the beginning. The science is clear there. So, needless to say, I became very fond of Nancy, and needless to say, as I go around the country speaking on this issue, Nancy, in a way, is always there with me. So it's an honor to be here and receive the Nancy Award. But again, it's more than just an honor, it's an opportunity. So what do I mean by an opportunity? Well, I said Nancy and I, and to this day, if Nancy was here, she'd be as frustrated as most of us are. We still haven't moved that political ball very much. It starts getting cut. We're happy if we don't get cut here in the state of Minnesota, given our budget environment. And yet, a month or so ago, there was a committee vote on a new stadium for the Minnesota Vikings, and it almost got out of committee. It was one vote away. That was $600 million. Where were we $600 million? Did we get to a committee? We didn't come close. So there's a frustration that Nancy and I felt way back when, and I think it's still debatable, that while we have this incredible amount of research, we know how to do this. We can debate on some of the details, but in the big picture, we know how to. We know if we provide a healthy, engaging, enriching environment for kids, starting as early as prenatal, we can have a big effect. Jeffrey Cannon is doing this on Children's Zone. 4th grade, his kids, there's no gap. We're showing this in our pilot in St. Paul, the Mel pilot with scholarships. We've got our parents so engaged. Their biggest concern, they tell us, not with the scholarships, they love the scholarships. It's not with the mentors. The mentors are terrific. Not with the programs. They're going to very high quality programs. The biggest concern is how good is K-12 going to be? How good is the kindergarten? Is it going to be as good as? Well, once you start getting parents thinking that way, I'm going to tell you we're a long way towards success. So we know how to do this. So why haven't we done it? So I think it was clear to Nancy, and it's a lot clearer to me today as to why this is so hard to move politically, even though we have the science, even though we know how to implement the economics, it's very clear. There's a visibility issue here. These kids don't vote. I was in Illinois, I said at least in Minnesota they don't vote. I don't know about elsewhere. Most of the parents at risk, not very politically very powerful. These issues, you know the problems, you don't see the problems every day, you just don't see them. You live out in the suburbs for sure, you don't see them. They're long-term problems. We're talking about kids who drop out of school and eventually end up, high percentage of them, in the criminal system and end up in jail. They're long-term problems. We tend to, unfortunately, we in the industry tend to put out dates like 2020, as Richard said. That's not acceptable. The Vikings aren't going to wait till 2020. They want to stay home tomorrow. Like Rich said, we can't wait. I mean, how many more kids start school barely knowing their name? How many more kids are we losing? say, so we need that edge, if you will. We need to make this more visible. One way to do this is just what we're doing here. We give awards, we hear from some of our top leaders here in this issue, and we promote it that way. We've got to continue to make it visible. You know, what I hope to do to carry out this work, as mentioned a number of times, the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation is doing the scholarship pilot in St. Paul. There's actually a version of that out in Wayzata. There's an interfaith group that they now give up to 90 scholarships. You might not think we've got poor families out in Wayzata, but we do. We have children raising children. This is an issue whether it's in the inner city or whether it's in the suburbs or whether it's in rural Minnesota. Poverty exists throughout our state. So we're going to try to make these pilots as visible as we can. We're working not just here in Minnesota, but around the country. And we're hoping to get the kind of results we're seeing in St. Paul, and put out the reports, and making it so concrete that they can't say no anymore. Make it so obvious, make it so relevant. We still got a long way to go. We need your help. I think you're going to find that MELF, and if I go over to the University of Minnesota, we will continue to do this. I thank you for your support, and I thank you for the honor that Nancy awarded.